Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to webinar week number 4 and day number 2 here with Beyond Pulse in our Coach Education series. Absolutely delighted today to have Mr. Mark Wilson alongside me as always, and then our special guest today, a good friend of mine, Mr. Zach Eddinger. Zach is going to give a brief introduction to himself and obviously the topic that we've kind of come on to discuss today, which is around the concept of growing leaders and creating leadership establishments within your program, something that many of us profess to wanting to do, but perhaps aren't always capable of executing. And the soccer club that Zach runs, Vale, is a partner of ours at Beyond Pulse, and we've been really intrigued and excited by the work that he's done over there in Connecticut with growing a program that I think is both incredibly unique and immensely beneficial to the young players with which he gets to work. So Zach, thank you for joining us. Really excited to dive into this, mate. If you could please provide a little bit of background on you, your football, your soccer journey to this point.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So just like every other youth, I started playing soccer in my hometown of Middletown, Connecticut. And when I started playing, you couldn't go to Premier Soccer until you were 13 years old. So we played in the local travel organizations. And then I began my journey with Oakwood Soccer Club here in Connecticut. And then did that until college. I went to Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, a small Division III school that had a rival of Messiah. It's the biggest D3 rivalry. Played my playing days there, a little bit of PDL summers while I was in college, and then went out into the workforce. Started working in a national home builder and always coaching on the side.
And then?
From there, coaching on the side was something that I just really enjoyed. So I was in Hagerstown, Maryland, and there was soccer all around me. I feel like the central Pennsylvania and in the Maryland area, some of the best soccer in the United States. So I was coaching and working on the side. My wife and I wanted to start a family, and so we moved back to Connecticut to get closer to home. And when I got back to home, the soccer scene had just changed so much. There was premier organizations popping up all over the place. Wanting to continue that coaching journey, I sought out a club out of the Glastonbury area that was world-class soccer, and the director of coaching was Sean Bailey. And so Sean and I had a really just warm and inviting conversation the first day that I came to meet with him, where he explained what he wanted to do with the club, how getting the right young coaches in place was so important, and what the journey for those players could be. I was there for about a year and a half before they merged with CFC, which is Connecticut Football Club. My wife and I went to Long Island, and then we were in Long Island for about 2 years, and then we came back to Connecticut. So when I came back from Long Island, that was when I decided that I wanted to have a bigger role in what the club was doing. I had seen a lot of club soccer, and I had an opinion that was more foundational in how I want the club to be built. And so the local youth program in Middletown that I had grown up playing for was losing its best and brightest to all of the other premier organizations around us. And so I felt like if I got more involved and hired the right staff around us, then we could keep them at home. And we could structure an establishment there that gave them everything that they wanted by leaving right in our hometown of Middletown. And so that was 2012. I was running a property management company on the side, or as my main job, and then was the executive director of Middletown Youth Soccer, and we formed Sporting Connecticut at that point in time. And that was really when, all of the concepts that I wanted to have with soccer started to come into fruition, and really started me to form ideas on what youth soccer specifically could do for the young athletes.
So talk to me, Zach. Obviously, you've tuned in to a number of these, so you've kind of heard this conversation before. I'm changing it with you a little bit to move just away from purely or necessarily just the soccer education and inspiration piece, but we've spoken about the fact that when you're trying to develop people, that it's more than just the football piece that you're focused on. So please speak to me, if you could, about the biggest influences in shaping your approach to the game, to life, and who those people are that obviously you try to carry the lessons from with you into what you do on a day-to-day basis, right?
I had a very unique upbringing in soccer in that my parents had no clue. I'm the youngest of 5, okay? And we grew up on a farm. And so my parents had no clue about sports, right? My father would come up with nicknames and that was it. And I learned so much about, just like the car ride later on in life. I hear all of these things about like what the car ride does to players and everything else. My car ride was a great time to have a conversation with my mother, who was my best friend, right? And so later on in life, in learning about what other people dealt with and what I got the joy of, it was the experience of youth sports and really the relationship or the individual time that I got with my mother that was so important to me. And so then I went down this path of, okay, what is the experience of youth sports for these players? So often, right, we come to this game because of our passion for it and our love that we build at the youngest age groups. But then it turns into this model of, okay, I have to be the best today, right? Because the families and the parents live vicariously through their children. And so I didn't want that. And I didn't want anybody in the clubs that I participated in to have to deal with that. Now, does it still happen? Does it happen? Yes. But I think that what I learned from my mom from that adventure was what we could do to like how we can shape a relationship with a child through the experiences that we're having with them. And so that was the most important thing to me, right? And the Leadership Institute, which we're going to dig into further, and really the person before the athlete really just stems off of that from my mom, right? She would, like, there was a time where I would get frustrated with the ref and I had gotten a yellow card or something for being foolish, right? And just talking back to the ref. And she would, in the car ride home, she was like, why did you have to say all those things? Like, did it do anything good to achieve a better result for you in the flow of the game? She's like, why don't you just tell the referee that he's all mixed up and then continue to play, right? And so I knew what that meant. He didn't know what it meant, and then I would continue to be able to play the game. And so my mother, I think, was my biggest influence on what I wanted the experience for the children to be like, and why I wanted it to be so different, right?
Well,
Um, so then I would think, okay, so in 2016, my mother passed away, and I had decided that I no longer wanted to do property management as my full-time profession. I had a couple of real estate investment properties, and now it was a time where I was able to live out my dreams. And so I went on this journey of growth, and I came at it from a playing side and not a pedagogy side. And so the first thing that I did was schedule into Tovo's T1 course in Barcelona. And that experience was truly transformational. It was transformational on a lot of different levels. So Anthony Latronica was there, who at the time was coaching in the Paralympics for the U.S. national team. John O'Sullivan was there from Changing the Game podcast and all of the work that he does. And then obviously Todd Bean. And this was the first group that ever went on that course. And so the conversations and the way that they built it, you would walk about 1.5 miles to the fields for training, right? And he said right in the beginning, you're not going to learn as much from me as you're going to learn from the people that surround you. So make it a point to have a conversation with everybody here. So I sought out a different person every single day on that journey, and it was a 25-minute conversation, right? And I just learned from that community that there's more than just the winning and losing of the game. At the same time, through conversation with Todd, I learned about what the Cruyff Institute meant. right? So the Cruyff Institute was built to teach management and or business skills to the athletes during their playing days, so that when their time as athletes had come to an end, they could continue to further their careers, right? And so like this now sat with me, okay, well, how long are we actually getting to play the sport that we love, right? Most players are done in their 30s, low 30s. And so what is that as far as the life expectancy goes and what a career goes? It's a short period of time in your career, right? And so it was through those conversations that I started to formulate what I believe is the best use of the youth sports experience. Um, so that was a really interesting one because I stayed really well in touch with Todd. I've taken teams back to Tovo and to Barcelona, at Vale. Me and O'Sullivan talk on the phone, and I have a coach that's going out to his conference in Colorado this summer. So all of those things continued to form what we wanted to do. And then the last one I think that was really important to forming what we were building was Brett Ledbetter. And I don't know him directly, but what he's done with What Drives Winning has really formulated a lot of how we want to take the children through the process of growth. And so I would say that those, 4 or 5, those handful of people really shaped what we decided to build with Vale.
Thank you. Obviously, people that know us personally and the brand professionally know that some of the names that you referenced there are dear friends. And again, I think it's testament to the work that they're doing and the ideas that they're sharing, that obviously you have developed the approach that you have, and obviously the work that you've done as a result is kind of directly linked to their messages, and it's very kind of powerful and inspiring to see. So thank you for the background. What I want to go into, obviously we said we'll talk about the Leadership Institute, we'll talk about what you've done. For me, a lot of it is grounded on the concepts of servant leadership from you and the ability to give back. For people less familiar with that concept, can you delve in a little bit to what it is and why it's so important to you, and kind of why you believe in it so much?
Yeah, sure. So servant leadership to me is just really that it's a framework that everything we do is to serve the people around us, right? And when we improve ourselves, when we learn and take on board knowledge, it is so that we can share that knowledge in order to improve people and help them on their journey. Again, I think it comes back to my mother first, but then also the faith that we have, right? And so with a strong foundation of faith, you can understand how putting others first becomes the greatest form of fulfillment and gratitude. And so that's where it stemmed from. And in the community that I serve, I think it's become really, really important because you pass that servanthood across, right? So when I go out of my way to help person A, B, and C that surrounds me, they now also want to do those same things. And so when it comes to our coaching staff, right? Well, I want to connect with each of my coaches to learn how I can help them to improve, to do whatever I can do to help them improve. And therefore, they're passing that same information on to their players. At the college level with Wesleyan, it's the same kind of thing, right? How can I help you to achieve your goals so that you can take your life to where you want it to be? And so it's just at this point, it's something that I think about every day. And on my personal growth journey, it is so that I can serve the people around me.
Yeah, and I think for people that haven't read the book Legacy, there is a concept in there which is plant trees that you'll never see grow. And the idea being exactly what Zach's just referenced, that you can impact people directly, and then you can impact people indirectly from the people that you've impacted directly. And the ripple effect of of Zach, as you referenced, that kind of one kind of action, it can be transformative across so many different layers. And those people might not know that the reason their coach is speaking to them or taking the time with them is because another did it for them. But it's a wonderful book for anybody who hasn't read it. But B, it links kind of so nicely to the concepts that you're talking about, and obviously the people that have influenced you and shaped your actions, and now why you are the way that you are. So it's a cool one for people to read up on: servant leadership, legacy. Kind of dig it out if you haven't yet. Okay, let's go in to obviously what the Leadership Institute is at Vale. It's, to my knowledge, it's the most unique program of its kind in the country. I certainly haven't, across all of the friends that I have in the game and that we've worked with on a personal, professional level with Beyond Pulse, I haven't yet seen anybody doing it as intentionally and deliberately as you have. So for the benefit of those who are less familiar, please talk about what it is, what it includes, and ultimately how it is delivered.
Sure. So I'll start with, I guess, where it started to where it is today. So when we started Vale, which was in 2018, we were and just for the people that don't know, Vale is actually a multi-sport youth sports club. So we have both basketball and soccer. Obviously, my background and as the president and owner of Vale is mostly soccer, but my basketball team is fantastic as well. But on the soccer side, so the way that it started was better people make better athletes, right? And that goes directly into legacy and into All Blacks. And the reality is, I would always choose somebody with higher character when everything else is even, right? And so at the time that we started Vale, I was also at Wesleyan. And what we were finding at Wesleyan, which Wesleyan's a NESCAC school in Middletown, that I had been at when I was a young kid playing with the athletes that were there. And Jeff Wheeler, who's the head coach there, and I had gotten to be very close friends. And so he brought me in to actually coach their JV team. They had a B team back in the day in order to keep the kids that were smaller and younger and see if they could come along and make the varsity squad. And so him and I got into a bunch of conversations about the character of the players, their inability to have hard conversations, just what we wanted to see in them as things got hard, right? Leaving your home, going to school, freshman year, it's hard, it's different. So that then took me back to, okay, well, I'm starting a youth organization here in Middletown. How can I give the players the infrastructure that helped them to be successful when they went on to college or whatever else they were doing? So then we were like, all right, well, let's go. So when Vale first started, we had what we called advancement classes, okay? So each day you would have training for your normal 90 minutes, but in addition to that, we would attach a 30-minute advancement class. In those advancement classes, initially, we were doing mostly leadership training. So what was leadership training? Well, we would do a human pretzel, and we would have the kids figure out the way to get out of the human pretzel, right? We would have them sit back to back with a piece of paper, and one of them communicate what they were seeing on the piece of paper, and the other one draw what they were being communicated to. These different advancement classes, they would also be strength and conditioning. They would also be sports psychology. They would also be video analysis and things along those lines. That's how it began. And we did that for, I would say, the first season and a half. Then from there, we found that there were some players that were taking it a lot more seriously, and there were some players that weren't taking it as seriously. And we didn't want to force the players to do it if they didn't want to do it. So that's when the foundation of the Leadership Institute started to take shape. So the Leadership Institute is right now it's a 7-week, 90-minute course that happens during the winter months at Vale. It's a combination, it's a mixed diversity background of basketball and soccer players. that come in. There's two groups in the pioneering year. We had 7th and 8th graders, so middle school groups, and then we had a high school group that came in. And we teach it like a college leadership class. After the leadership class happens, then the athletes participate in training with our younger teams. So they get a chance to lead on a daily basis. Again, for me, we talk all the time about what leadership is and how leaderships, are a dime a dozen and everything else. But in my opinion, it's a skill that can be taught and learned, right? And so we wanted to give them the foundation of, okay, here are some things that you should be thinking about. Let's enact on those things, and then let's come back, let's digest it, review it, and then go at it again. Because again, I feel like the learning process in sport and everything else happens in that review process. It doesn't happen in the first error. It happens when you think about what that error was, and then you change it to learn, right? And so it was the same thing in the Leadership Institute. So for 7 weeks, they come in for 90 minutes on a Sunday, and we take them through not a college curriculum, but a curriculum that we built for their age, that was foundationally what they would be working on when they got to college.
And talk to us a little bit about what some of the tasks were, the content was, the novel application process, like just so that people again understand the depth that's kind of gone into it.
Yeah. So I believe that there's 4 pillars to character, right? There's self-discipline, there's your personal core values, your sense of identity, and your emotional security. Okay. And so when we went to build our curriculum, we decided, okay, we want to take the children through these different areas. Because for instance, if I know what my core values are, right? If I have my personal core values, and again, mine is service, right? So I have a personal core value that is service to others. Well, when there is a hard decision to be made, and I've addressed that my core value is service, I'm going to lean on that in order to solve the problem in a way that leads towards my core values. Okay. So self-discipline was first. So when we thought about the curriculum, we thought about what a leader needs as far as self-discipline, right? The John Wooden quote about you are what you can say it better than I can, Tom, but you are the example that you set for your athletes, right? And so what do you need to do to show them that that this is important to lead? So we went to a James Clear book, Atomic Habits, and we talked about habit formation, and we showed them what habit formation could look like. Then we talked to them about a growth mindset and why a growth mindset was extremely important to who they were becoming. Then we went into their core values, and we started talking to them about, okay, well, why do you want to have core values for yourself? What do those core values look like when things get hard, right? And when we gave examples, so we would say, and a lot of what we did, and I was talking to Billy Cassane, who's he's my soccer director of coaching, who helped me with this program. And what he said is what he liked so much about the program, we didn't do much lecture, right? This was the athletes having the conversations with each other that we were guiding. And that became really important, right? It's like, okay, how do we get them active in this setting? Because that's what leadership is, right? Leadership is not standing on the sideline. Leadership is engaging and having dialogue back and forth, and then coming up with solutions together as a unit. And so then the sense of identity stuff, right? Then we talked about what that meant. And as we went along through our syllabus, we tweaked and made changes based upon the age demographics. But we really took them through what we felt like was the important things in order to come away and be able to deliver to our younger athletes inside of our club afterwards.
Yeah, and I think obviously why I've always been so intrigued and impressed with the product, the program, is because many of us I'll say us as youth coaches, collegiate coaches, we often lament the fact that our players, and Willow, we've spoken about this almost every single every single talk we've had over the last month is psychosocial proficiencies, leadership, character. You know, Mark, you use the phrase, your character will define you, your mentality will define you, character counts, right? We can kind of talk about all the different quotes and cliches. But the reality is, when we're programs that profess to believe in holistic development, we've got to show it, right? And we've spoken about walking your talk. And for me, I think this is just a really novel and unique example of people saying, okay, well, actually, if what we do targets the 99% versus the 1%, which many of the youth programs on the line, it's your job. Your job isn't to create professional footballers. Obviously, the MLS or the girls DA, some girls ECNL pro, fine. Some of them will have pros in their program, but for most of us, the 99% is what we want to make sure we impact the most. And I just think it's a really creative and quite ingenious way of demonstrating that you're going to live out your values, and you're going to walk your talk, and you're going to act on what you say you believe in. Talk to me, if you could, Zach, about any of the challenges with implementation, and ultimately where you hope the program will lead your players in the long run.
So the challenges, I think the biggest challenge that we had with implementation originally was engagement, right? And so, like, I didn't feel like we could force this. So again, originally we were going to do it with the whole group, right? And when we did that, the entirety of the group, we had enough athletes that didn't want to do it, and or we had some families that weren't interested in it, right? They were like, well, no, I'm here for soccer. You're a soccer program. You're not a leadership program. And we had some very difficult conversations in the beginning of that was like, well, hold on a second here. We believe, right, and we've said it from day one, that the person is more important than the athlete. And so that we want to, like, our mission is to maximize potential in life and sport. Sport comes second, because sport is going to be the shorter duration, right? And so that became a really hard point in the beginning, was we couldn't go as far with the athletes that wanted, because other athletes were taking away from the importance of what we were trying to do. So that was number one. Number two was exactly like you said, finding the time, right? Because as coaches, we're all extremely competitive. And so some of my coaches, when we first started this, were like, well, hey, I would like to have more time for some technical work, right? And they were like, can we use the advancement class for just technical? Can we skip the leadership day and go back to this and this? And so there was buy-in there, even from my staff, that I had to get over the hurdle and get them to a point where they were like, okay, yeah, I see the value in this, right? And it was really nice, was the feedback from a lot of our membership that was like, what you guys are doing is just so different. I have kids in this club and this club and this club, and they're not getting anything like this. And I can see what this is going to do for them in the long term, right? And we had another gentleman that came in that said, the first day of college, the first thing that my professor said to me was, if you can learn to communicate, you will go far in life. But it's not a skill that everybody gets, right? And so that was really helpful for us to get over the hump. Then from there, like, that was the hardest part in the initial aspect. But now what we've seen is the kids love it, right? And it's almost like a badge that they get to wear with the Leadership Institute. And they're so in this time, we're having them write legacy letters to the club, right, about what it means to be a Valean, which is the cliche term that we use for our membership. But it's really been awesome to see the kids take on board the information, and then this last step of integration, right? So I had an athlete on my 2007 girls team who led a 2007 training session because of how strong she was. And me and the staff now are like, you know what? How cool would it be when these athletes come back and coach in our program? Like, that's going to be something that's super special with how far they're going to be in advance with their soft skills and all of the things that go into coaching, you know, like everybody else on this podcast has talked about. And so that almost becomes a more valuable badge to me than the kids that play pro, right? Is how many of them are going to turn into top tier coaches. And so that's really fun for us to think about.
I'm unpacking a ton in my brain here, Zach. I'm a big advocate of developing leaders through sports, and you can take a lot of lessons in different industries from the business world, where there's lots of kind of really innovative mechanisms and even anecdotal insights to how that's been developed at the elite end or the highest end of successful businesses. And when I think about developing leaders, I think first and foremost, you have to know who perceives what characteristics as a leader. Some people think leadership's a popularity contest. Some people think autocratic leadership, authoritarian leadership is the way forward. You know, you've got other aspects of leadership, transactional. So I give you information that's valuable, you use it, you succeed, you then buy into me, you then become loyal. There's so many different forms. Democratic leadership. And the biggest thing for me, I think and this is just in my humble opinion, the type of leadership I value the most is transformational. It's a mix of having the experience of understanding what autocratic leadership is, of what transactional leadership is, of what charismatic leadership is, and what different components make up the output, if you will, from that individual using those different types of leadership styles. And I think, as you quite rightly said, you've got to have your core principles, but those core principles, I think, have to be organic depending on which leadership style you're taking on at that minute. And I think the more adaptable and the more organic leadership can be, the more transformational it can be, so that whatever circumstance you find yourself in as an organization, you're always able to pivot and adapt and learn and grow. If you've got all of these different leadership styles, and more importantly, the understanding of what they are, what they represent, and what they mean, underpinning everything you do. So it's fascinating to see you innovating in this way. And I suppose my question coming out of this is there a particular type of leader you're looking to develop? Or are you trying to blend all of these leadership styles to help kids be adaptable in what leadership looks like in lots of different environments?
Yeah. So the answer to your question is there's not one set style of leadership that we're trying to train them towards. It's the emotional intelligence that goes into leadership, right? And the understanding and vulnerability to have a conversation. I think my biggest takeaway for the children is, so when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about managing yourself, understanding what the other person is going through, and then understanding the interaction based upon your emotional state and their emotional state, right? And the reason that becomes so important is, well, let's say, for instance, and I talk to my children about this all the time, mom's cooking, there's laundry all over the floor, and the first thing that you do is walk in and ask to use the Xbox. Well, the answer is probably going to be no, right? But if you walk in the house, you recognize that, okay, I can pick the house, I can do these small things to pick up the laundry, I can, wait till ask if she needs my help with anything with dinner. And then when she sees that I did the laundry and then recognizes that I tried to help her, now I ask about the Xbox. Well, which one is going to help me to get the end goal that I want, right? Leadership is the same way. And so if I recognize the impact that I can have on first them as the athletes that I'm working with, and also understand how I need to work with each of them differently, then I can get their buy-in. And that's really what I want, right? So the thing that is so cool about the Leadership Institute is it's a petri dish for me to try so many things, right? And like Tom and I had this conversation at Christmas where, like, well, why don't you do this virtual to a larger audience, right? Like, why don't you take this online learning module and offer it to all of the other club programs? Well, I don't know the best definition of success for it, and each club is going to be different for what they want to do, right? But if the children can see what I'm trying to do and I can reflect on it and have a conversation with them that just says, hey, look, I tried this and it didn't work. Because of that, I'm going to pivot into this. That's a huge takeaway in and itself, right? So what you're saying, Mark, is they need to be able to lead in different ways based upon the environment they're in, right? If I'm giving a talk to 500 people and I want to get their buy-in in that audience, I'm going to do something a different way versus when I'm one-on-one versus when I'm in a group of 3 to 5, right? My questions and my ability to listen are going to be extremely important to show them what I have going on, and also the way that I communicate to show them my passion for what's going on, right? So again, when I start talking about leadership, I talk faster, right? I get more excited. I lean forward in my chair, and I think people see that, and so it's the same thing for the individuals in our membership that we want from them. And so, does that answer your question? It's not any one way.
Yeah, it does, and that's the leadership style that. And I was looking at the executive connection. I've been on a 30-hour podcast stroke webinar listening to somebody deliver these different types of leaderships, and the transformational leadership is the one that encompasses everything.
Yeah.
So you're so adaptable depending on your environment, and you just explained it clearly there for me in your answer. You're so adaptable in any environment that you can still have the same impact if you're flipping in and out of each one of these styles. I think one of the key points there is what underpins each style, and you said it. Emotional intelligence is one. Resilience might be an underpinning characteristic of autocratic leadership. Sure. So each one of these emotions and feelings and characteristics underpins every one of those leadership styles. And the transformational style for me, I think, is the one that I'm building towards it. I'm still learning. So I think the journey you've got your players on and your children on is phenomenal.
Well, and I think that's extremely important. Again, you go back to a growth mindset. Part of my journey in this direction was, so I went to a conference with my brother in our property management company, and I read they said, read this book, Miracle Morning, right? So I read this book called The Miracle Morning, and it talks about when you start your day with these, say, this routine of 30 minutes to whatever, you've already accomplished more than everybody else has, right? And so because of that, you can have more confidence going into your day and feel better about where you are. That grabbed a hold of me, right? I was not someone that loved academics, right? But I always loved people and dealing with people. But that fire that was lit by reading that book started me on a journey to learn so that I could better serve my people. And that, I think, has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. So like what you're saying is, we're never going to get all the way there. On your road to mastery, what you find is all of the things that you don't know, right? They talk about the cycle of learning, and it starts with, all right, you start with you don't know what you don't know. Then you go to you know what you don't know. Then you grow, and then you start to engage and enact based upon what you've learned, right? But what I know at this stage is there's so much more that I have to learn. And I find fulfillment in that learning because I can share that with the Leadership Institute, with my team, with my coaches, right? Like when I look for a coach at Vale, I looked for the soft skills first, because their engagement with their athletes becomes extremely important. And that's the leadership side of what I want from them.
Let me turn this to your role as, yes, owner, but I know you don't like the phrase DOC, but how can you give some practical examples of actions that you're very intentional and consciously deliberate about performing on a day-to-day basis that perhaps, as Willow says, the transformational model would basically resolve around being an example that others choose to follow? You're setting an example that they're influenced by in such a way that they want to conform without being asked to conform. So, give me some day-to-days of how you continue to crush the day, seize the day, win the day, whatever it all the phrases that you have around the mantra that kind of motivates you. How could other leaders in club positions take some kind of ideas and tips?
Okay. So we have a level 10 meeting every Tuesday where we start with gratitude and growth, right? So gratitude based upon the fact that we get to do what we want to do every single day, but more importantly, growth. In that meeting, we do a lot of what I call a post-mortem, right? So a post-mortem goes into what we can do better, culturally, what we can do better, experientially, what we can do better, what kind of ability for teaching lessons. That's a really important one for us, right? Is like, all right, well, often we have the teaching lessons of the game, right? And again, I want to talk about the finite versus infinite game, but the coaching lessons that come from the game and how they might transform to your real world experiences. So that's a very tangible thing that I talk to my coaches about regularly, right? What does, if you go down a goal, right? What does your resiliency do based upon that? And how does that transform to something that you might be doing in the real world? So those kinds of objectives are things that my coaches have to do. And in Vale, we have a Player of the Month award. Each coach picks a Player of the Month, and we've set out the tangible things that we want the kids going after in order to become that Player of the Month. So they're not just about who scored the most goals in this said month. They're about, okay, who trained the right way, or who engaged their teammates in a right way, who helped their teammates to be accountable in a right way that helped the team improve, right? What were the leadership skills or traits that the athletes personified over the course of the month that we want to talk about, that we want to showcase in our club? So those become very tangible things that we discuss all the time.
And sorry, more from you and what your day-to-day looks like, and your individual actions and behaviors. What are you consciously trying to do to upskill and lead by, in essence, lead by example on your like day-to-day stuff? So you obviously mentioned that you read for half an hour a day. You like what about how you empower staff? What about how, what are you prepared to do that demonstrates the type of actions and behaviors that you want others to emit without saying you must do this?
Yeah, so I think that the type of leadership, similar to what we were talking about with Mark, I attempt to be a transformational leader. And so what that means is that my staff are empowered to have an entrepreneurial mindset as to what we need inside of our organization. So for instance, if a coaching staff feels like they need, that it would be really good for them to do a video analysis, or let's say that they have a new idea, for instance, okay? They should first try that idea with their team, and if they like that idea, they should bring it to the entire coaching staff, right? So those are the kinds of things inside our organization that we do. So each of the team members has the opportunity to come to me. Obviously, I'm at the facility all of the time, and try things. We also, something that's really cool is we have coach to coach evaluations, right? So like being about what we say, this lateral accountability is a skill, right? So managing sideways, managing up, all of those things are leadership traits. So our coaching staff will peer evaluate the other staff on their team. And so we have a schedule that we put in place that says, okay, Coach A, I want you to go watch Coach B, and then I want you to have a feedback session about what you enjoyed about the session, what you thought could be different about the session, and something that you might have done, right? The reason that we do this is twofold. I can't get to everybody to watch as many sessions as I want. It's threefold. I can't get to as many sessions, one. Two, everybody else has great ideas. Going back to the TOVO walks, right? You learn more from your colleagues than anybody else, and they see things differently. And when you have somebody watching you, like, that's kind of cool, right? And then the third thing I think that's really important about that is the culture that we've formed, right? So like our coaches, play in our futsal leagues all the time, and they'll stay after for a beer and talk about their sessions, talk about how they're engaging players, what's working, what's not working, what they liked about a session and didn't like about a session. And it's just a really open environment for them to share. They'll even do it to me, right? So like for years, I hadn't had people evaluating my training sessions unless I went on a coaching badge, right? And so now my staff will come and evaluate me in a coaching session. And it's really good because the same leadership qualities, well, they're having to tell me the things that they think I can do better, right? You know, how challenging can that be for somebody to go to their boss and say, hey, boss, your talking points were too long, right? Or you didn't have their heart rates high enough. There was too much standing time. You didn't make it competitive enough. Like they weren't sweating, you know, you were talking at them rather than asking a lot of questions. So a lot of those things get incorporated into our day-to-day at Vale.
Brilliant. There's a couple of questions just on the line. Willow, before I go there, is there anything that you want to dive into? Obviously, Zach's been
the one thing that's evident to me is you just mentioned the word boss there, Zach, and what you've created at Vale is a very different vision of what boss maybe traditionally means. The fact that coaches feel comfortable, and maybe they do or they don't, you know, inwardly maybe they don't sometimes, but you've created an environment that's open-minded where coaches can come and share their thoughts and opinions. It shows a level of compassion, vulnerability, empathy, and whatever environment I've been in that's been successful. People tend to look at the vulnerability and empathetic characteristics as a weakness sometimes, and that's normally autocratic leaders. But they're, for me, whatever successful environment I've been in, they were the things that actually underpinned being successful, because vulnerability means you're going to surround yourself with people that have skill sets and qualities you don't, and attributes. And empathy means you're going to be able to navigate emotionally your entire environment, or have the people around you that maybe add value in a way you don't, to be able to do the same thing. So yeah, just that thing you said there about I'm the boss, but people come and evaluate me. The only way they're willing to do that is if they feel comfortable enough to do that, and that's a
Yeah,
sign
and I
of
think that word vulnerability, you know, it's such an important word, right? We taught 30 minutes on vulnerability, and it's one of the first things that we do in our advancement classes. So in our advancement classes, we would have a presentation on vulnerability and it being a strength and not a weakness. Because if you think about an athlete, if they're not willing to ask for the help or say, hey, coach, I don't actually know what I'm doing here, that fear stagnates them more than anything else, right? And so it's extremely important that they're willing to talk to you, right? And that being vulnerable, that's why I think of that vulnerability as a strength. And I explain that to people, and I explain that to the athletes, and I explain that to the staff, because by me showing that I am human and that I make mistakes and that I learn from those mistakes, right? That's the example that I want the children to have. Like I want them to play on that line of making mistakes all the time, because that's how they learn the fastest. It is the review of those mistakes is where the learning happens. No different in the leadership. So at Wesleyan, Coach Wheeler and I next week on a video call are going to we're going to show them how confrontation looks. We're going to role play confrontation for those players, because we want them holding each other accountable at a higher standard to what the training should look like when we're not around. In the NESCAC, you're not allowed to have anything but like any training outside of your window of time in the fall, right? And so we need to show them the different ways that they need to have the conversations in order to move on in the direction that we want them to move on. And so that becomes really important.
Yeah, there's a ton of it, mate. That obviously conflict resolution, but also without wanting to get too morbid. I think that you're seeing, and Teresa Beekman-Tree was a great guest back in week 1 about societally the challenges that this generation face and the pressures that they are under, that are really unbeknown to any of us. We're obviously we're not pre-adolescence, adolescence anymore. And obviously you've sadly seen a spike in, you know, children taking their own life, everything like that we obviously don't want to think about, discuss, or ever have to deal with. But the ability to get them comfortable having a conversation and asking for help, and that being perceived as a positive. I think, as we said at the very start of the conversation, clubs will often say that we believe in developing the whole person, but only touch on the soccer piece. And for anybody listening now or later, I think this is it's an exceptional example of mechanisms through which you can actually deal with the whole person and the soft skills.
Sorry, just the one thing I wanted to point out that so Simon Sinek recently wrote a book about the infinite game, right? And it talks in there. There's a really valuable experience story that he talks about between Microsoft and Apple. And he says that he gave keynote speeches to both Microsoft and Apple in like a 3-week window of time, so very, very close. And he was very intentional after the speeches. After the speech with Apple, to tell a story about what happened with Microsoft. So Microsoft gave him this new Zoom tool, right, which was like the best new piece of tech that was out there, and it was way better than anything that Apple had produced. And he got it as a gift after the keynote speech was over. When he sat in the car with Apple after he had given that keynote speech, he brought up the gift that Microsoft had given to him, right? And what Apple basically said is, I bet that piece of tech that they gave you is better than everything that we have produced. But you know what? What we do, right, is we stick to who we are. We don't change based upon what the people are doing around us. And I think that's been really challenging. I think that is really challenging for a lot of clubs, right? So like even in the environment that we're in today with the coronavirus, you see one club or two clubs starting to do things and then everybody else mimicking and copying those things, right? Which is fine if it's for the betterment of the children, but you got to have your core values and figure out the ways that you stick to those things regardless of what people are doing around you. And if you can do that, you will grab on to the community that you want to work with rather than a community at large. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me. When we were at Sporting, we grew it, I think, to like 750 members. At Vale, I don't think I'll get bigger than 400, right? I think I'm going to have one team at every age group, and then I'm going to have pools of players younger than that. And the reason for that is I think I can give more to those people, and I can build a better sphere of influence for the children that are in my community once I have the network fully in place. Whereas when I continue to drop new pieces into it, I'm never fully building out how those core values resonate within the club. And so that's a very, very different model than I've ever had in the past, and one that I'm extremely excited about. Same thing for my staff, right? I believe I'm gonna be able to hold on to my staff for a longer duration based upon what we're doing now.
Yep. Question going back to how you structured the curriculum of the Leadership Institute. Two things. One, was it based off, and I kind of guess I already know the question to this, but was it based off real research, kind of drove it with a blend of what your values were, or was it just kind of your opinion as to what they needed to know? And then secondly, you spoke of the fact that parents thought that you're just a soccer coach, that you're just a soccer club. Like, what place have you got to try to deliver this type of insight and information? So how did you structure it, first and foremost, and secondly, how did you facilitate buy-in?
Yeah. So it was a combination of some research. So we brought in a friend of mine who is a professor at UConn originally to build the syllabus with us and how he would bring them through based upon studies and everything else like that. What we found was culturally, the children all come from different backgrounds. So the baseline of the information that they had was not the same. So it didn't really matter the direction that we go is like the start to the finish line, as long as we touched on all of those pieces. And so we reframed it after our first, I would say, 2 classes, because originally we were a little bit lecture heavy and not as much engagement heavy, right? And so we wanted to really change that. So when we changed that, we went back to a model that says, okay, these are all of the things that we want to touch on, but how we get through them doesn't matter. All right. As far as the buy-in goes, I think most importantly, a lot of the families said, and we started using the language that was, look, you could be saying the same exact things at home, but because you're their parent, it doesn't resonate the same way. And as a coach, you probably hear that all the time, right? You could be standing next to mom could tell them to tie their shoes 5 times. As soon as you tell them to tie their shoes, they lean down and they tie their shoes, right? Or mom could be carrying their backpack for them, right? Which is something that we don't tolerate inside of our club. But mom could be carrying their backpack for them, and she should offer them to carry it 4 times, and they'll say no. And as soon as you say, carry your own backpack, they carry their own backpack. And so we have an influence on the athletes that's different than their parents. When we started to explain that to them and started taking on board the information and feedback that we were getting about the things that we were doing, the buy-in was there, right? The buy-in really came, and we did a lot of surveys from our athletes saying, hey, what did you like? What did you learn? Like, they had a journal that they had to reflect on each of the lessons in order to deal with that review and growth. And then their goal in that week was they had homework assignment on something that they had to enact. So let's say that it was a tough conversation. We asked them to go have a tough conversation and put in their journal what they felt like they could do better differently the next time that they had that tough conversation, right? And so those types of things, I think, showed the parents, wow, like, this is great. And it wasn't all our information. So we weren't telling, like, it's not like Mark was saying, it wasn't a dictatorship. It was showing them what we believe, why we believe it. And because it was anti-presentation, it was more them giving the answers and us just guiding them through the process.
That's brilliant. Thank you. We are at 60 minutes, so I am going to start to wrap this up. I may have missed some. I just wanted to re-echo people on the line. Obviously, you've name dropped a couple of books. Brett's What Drives Winning, Atomic Habits, Miracle Morning. Obviously, I mentioned Legacy. Was there one more that?
Yeah, Simon Sinek's Infinite Game.
Yeah. So again, guys, as we love to share and the ideas here, there's a couple there that are new to me. There's a number that are not, but again, obviously you can see how passionately Zach speaks about the lessons, and I think it's just a great opportunity, obviously, in the time that we're in right now, to upskill. And you know, if you believe in what the portion of this conversation has been and the benefit of it, I think there would be great resources to go to. So Zach, obviously on behalf of myself, Mark, Team Beyond Pulse, thank you ever so much for sharing your insight with us today, for the listeners now and then the listeners later on demand. If people, you know, would like to kind of reach out and ask for maybe some more insight or some guidance on how you've done what you've done, where can they find you? Social media, email, etc.
Yeah, social media. I think Instagram, I do some. Zach, what is it? Zach Eddinger 12, I think, on Instagram. But my email is Zach, Z-A-C-H, at Vale, S-C, V-A-L-E, S as in sports, C as in club.com. They can get me there. I'm very responsive to any of those things. And I'm a big ideas guy. I have a good team behind me that's good with the implementation of those ideas. But if people want to toss around ideas, I'm very happy to toss around ideas of what's working and not working and the direction that we're going to continue to move forward. We're going to double down on it next year. So we're thinking even further about what we're going to do for the children. And probably the thing that the kids are enjoying the most is the interaction and the coaching, right? So they had a mandatory 6 hours, 4 training sessions that they had to go into the teams, the younger teams inside of the club. And a lot of them are asking to do more and more and more, right? So we're talking about like a junior coaches program inside of our Sprouts program, and a bunch of different things where they can be more hands-on inside of the organization.
Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much, as we said, for your time and for your insight. To everybody that's listening, thank you for being here. Tomorrow we go with Jason Cutney, Boys ECNL Director, same time, same place, 1 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.